What hangs in the balance of us not talking about mental health?
You described to me is like psychological, like toxicity.
As youth ministry leaders, if we're going to help move students in the direction of that full life, we have to talk about this.
Welcome back to the Rethinking Youth Ministry podcast. My name is Ashley, and today I'm really excited to jump into the topic of mental health. But before we do, I want you to hear who's in the room with us. So to my left, the one, the only.
Hi, my name is Charlie Condor. This is my 26th year of working with students in either a classroom setting or in a church. I also serve at Orange as an Orange Student Specialist because I love to coach leaders.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Chinwe Williams. I'm a licensed clinical mental health therapist. And oh my gosh, I've had probably over 18 years of working with adolescents, young adults, adults and families. And I am a mom of a 20-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 9-year-old. So I'm excited to be here, and I'm really excited for this conversation.
That's amazing. Cool. Glad you're here. My name's Shane Sanchez. I'm a part of the Orange Students team. I've been involved in youth ministry for a little bit over 15 years now. I'm also a husband and a father of 4 kids, and I've got a little bit of my own mental health journey too, which we may get into as a youth ministry leader, which has informed and shaped a lot of my approach to ministry personally.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for being here. If you're listening, we don't have to convince you that the topic of mental health matters to be talking about in churches and families, and specifically in youth ministry. If you've seen any of the latest studies about mental health, you know that this is top of the mind topic, especially when it comes to Gen Z and Gen Alpha. So I'm excited to dive back into this. We could probably have 10 different episodes, but I'm excited to have this group around the table today. I would love to start off by talking about what hangs in the balance of us not talking about mental health.
Ooh.
Yeah, I think I'm going to jump in because what's exciting to share is that there are some latest statistics that came out from the CDC just this week. I think it was Tuesday. And I want to share that with you. And I'm actually going to look at it because I don't want to get it wrong. So according to the new data, suicide deaths in the United States across the board, across the age spectrum, increased. So that's sad news. It increased by 2.7% between the years of 2021 and 2022. And what's important to note is that there is a huge lag between when data is collected versus when it's published, right? So we're still waiting on the data from the last couple of years. So there's a lot to be hopeful for. Now, the piece that I just want to also mention is that between 2021 and 2022, suicide rates went down from 15.2% to 13.6%, which was a 10% decrease. And this is why this stat matters for us today among 15 to 24-year-olds. So that's the segment of the population that we were most concerned about in the last few years since the pandemic. However, there are some specific groups who are still struggling. And so there have been an increase in suicide rates since 2019 among Black adolescents, among Asian American and Hawaiian Pacific Islander adolescents, and among Asian American adolescents. So while we celebrate the decrease, right, I think that there's still some things that we need to pay attention to. So suicide is still the 3rd leading cause of death among young people.
Wow.
So for me, that's what hangs in the balance. And of course, that's the most severe consequence of not paying enough attention to mental health.
Yeah.
But we know that teenage girls are still struggling. We know that boys are still struggling. We know that these racial groups are still struggling. And so we want to make sure that we sound the alarm that mental health, whether if we're talking about suicide rates, which are really, really scary, to young people struggling with chronic anxiety or chronic despair for far too long, it's going to have a ripple effect. It's going to affect not just the students individually, their personal goals, their academics. It's going to affect their relationships and also their quality of life. So, yeah.
I also was reading something about the CDC was saying that the way we combat the mental health crisis happening is by putting a caring adult in the life of a
Wow.
kid or a teenager. And I'm like, okay,
Yep,
okay,
yep, we can
say
do
it
that.
louder for the people in the
Yeah, we
back.
can
We've
do
been
that.
saying that, you know what I'm
Like,
saying?
Wow.
welcome to
Right.
the conversation,
Yes,
CDC.
welcome, welcome. Glad you're here.
And part
Yeah.
of that is because of the data around loneliness,
Yeah.
right? The two groups that are impacted the most around loneliness are young people and elderly people over the age of 85. So I think, it's worth paying attention to. There's a connection between mental health and relationship.
Yeah.
That's good.
You know, I think when I hear those statistics, but I also think about this conversation, I think about a verse, which is kind of a life verse for me, which is John 10:10, and I know we all know it. But I really do believe that Jesus came to give us life and life to the full. And as youth ministry leaders, if we're going to help move students in the direction of that full life, we have to talk about this.
Yeah.
This is, we can talk about things like sin. We can talk about things like God's ideals for X, Y, and Z, like all of that kind of stuff. But if we're not going to address mental health, we are missing one of the greatest components of what it means, in my opinion, to have a full life.
Yes.
And what's interesting to me is how much mental health is connected to just overall well-being. I mean, medical doctors that aren't necessarily even in the mental health space will list it as like a top 5 aspect alongside diet and nutrition, exercise, all of those things for literally how well your life goes and your longevity in life and all of those things. And I don't know why we've parsed these things out for so long. And the church, like, we're willing to go down, these roads, but this one is, whether it's too intimidating for us or we don't understand it, or, the things that today's students struggle with are so different than what we're used to. Sometimes we shy away from it, or we're nervous to tread into it. But I'm like, no, this is a part of holistic discipleship
exactly
that
right.
ultimately leads to the full life Jesus promised.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I think it makes sense that some people are maybe more comfortable having this conversation than others.
For sure.
And if you're listening and you're like, okay, I understand the importance, I just don't know how to talk about it, we're so glad that you're here. If you're listening, you're like, I've been talking about this for years, we're so glad that you're here. We'd love to learn how those conversations are going.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, Charlie, I'm going to throw this to you. When and how did you become comfortable talking about mental health, whether it's with other people your age, or leaders, or parents, or students? Fill us in on that journey.
I just have been doing life with students for a really long time. And there was a huge period that this topic never came up, right? And then all of a sudden, someone who works with students, you become very hyper aware of how the students are doing, or I hope that you're hyper aware of how the students are doing.
Yeah.
And you begin to realize this is more. This is the holistic approach to discipleship, which is what I believe in. I didn't grow up in church and youth group. I don't have a mindset of what it's supposed to look like and supposed to be. So I just go rogue, right? And we just do whatever works. Within my own family, I became hyper aware raising a plus size queer daughter who, in a lot of spaces, looking on the internet, being on Instagram, and when Snapchat became so popular with her when she was in middle school, gosh, her world got bigger. So there was more things to talk about. And so she began to be more aware of what's happening around her. So then that just repeats and ripples again in our youth ministry spaces. And so I don't know. Am I answering your question? Does that?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Because there was a period of time in youth ministry, if you've been in it for 25 years, that we didn't talk about mental health.
Wow.
Because it wasn't something we even addressed or even knew about, right? Also, I grew up in a rural community. We sure don't talk about it on the farm, friends. That is, you just pull it up by your bootstraps and get back out there. And I think that's still the mentality in 2024.
Wow.
But as a parent, we stepped in a space that was far more beyond stress and anxiety. I mean, we're dealing with some pretty severe mental illness at my house. That gave me that gave me eyes to see, oh, wait. Anxiety and stress depression, but there's so much more. I didn't realize how much more there was to that conversation, right? I thought, okay, if I can address these things, like these 3 things in ministry, I'm doing a great job. But then as a parent, as our kids start walking through things and we began learning, right? Because we are like, talk about getting an education. Like we've had a deep dive to understand. There's so much more that students are dealing with, that parents are dealing with, that I had no idea. And honestly feel so ill-equipped to talk about.
Wow.
Thank you for sharing all that. And I know there are people listening right now who are like, man, I just got off the phone with a parent who's walking through something very similar. So I'm so glad that your perspective is in this.
But the reality is, though, from a parent's perspective, is no one's talking about it. Like, I feel so isolated. I have no one to share. I have no one to talk about. I don't even know if I didn't have Chinwei's number and someone on speed dial that I know that would take my call, who is going to talk to me about this?
Wow.
Because no one in my church is talking about it. No one is diving deeper than stress or anxiety. So I wonder, is our role at the church need to shift a little bit and provide community for parents and caregivers? Because friends, can you imagine, there's a lot of grandparents raising kids right now. How do they feel when a diagnosis is handed to their grandkid or a caregiver? Oh my gosh, y'all, why are we not providing space for them?
What if the church was a safe place for parents and grandparents and educators and students to have these really tough conversations? And I really loved your point, Charlie, that goes beyond, and I'm just going to put this in quotes, the garden variety mental health topics that we tend to talk about, which is stress, academic stress, where you're going to go to college, relationship stress, anxiety, and depression, not to minimize those things, but we have a whole host of conditions that can cripple families. Friends, I just got a call a few days ago from a mom, and I'm going to try to change up enough of the information so it's not overly biographical. She is a mom of 4, and I'm going to say under the age of 11, with a set of multiples, and I'll just leave it at that. She called me because she got my number from someone at a church who listened to Will and I have a conversation about mental health, and she was sharing about a lot of dysfunction in her home. And I will say this, she and her husband have not spoken in 2 years. But the reason she called was because her kids were showing signs of distress. Of course. And I said to her, because I know the person that gave her my number, have you spoken to her? She's like, oh, she's lovely. She's wonderful. We're really, really close. Oh no, I could never talk about this. So that's exactly what we're talking about. And I said, so you've been living in a lot of pain, and not just pain, suffering. And the only reason you reached out is because you saw it manifest in your kids. And that's really sad. And this is someone that she knows from the church. So thank God this person gave her the number of a mental health professional. But she's been living with this for a long time. And what if she opened up sooner?
Wow. You know, Dr. Chinwei, I know we've worked together quite a bit. You know, I've as a youth pastor, I've sent you quite a few texts of like, hey, a student just opened up about this. Like, help me work through this. So I think having a friend who is a mental health professional is a significant advantage as a youth worker. But I also think as youth workers, our own journeys and our own willingness to be vulnerable goes a long way. I can tell you for me, this conversation took on new meaning in 2018 when I had my first panic attack. Hopefully first and only, but that was a panic attack that had been years in the making. Because after I experienced that, I went on my own journey with counselors and mental health professionals, psychiatrists, and discovered, you know, for most of my life, I have been dealing with OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, and GAD, which is generalized anxiety disorder. And when I received my own diagnosis, one, my empathy level for students went through the roof, and 2, my self-compassion was unlocked in a way that it never had been before. And I think it helped show me where Jesus had been in my own journey the entire way. Like as an elementary kid who was struggling with OCD that had no idea, just by the way that it manifested. Like I just had no idea. As a middle schooler, like I do look back now and go, gosh, by the grace of God, I made it through middle school, because of how desperate and dark my intrusive thoughts and everything else were. And then, you know, as a young adult, eventually a youth ministry leader, a husband and a father, it all just came together in a new way. So when I went on, you know, that initial discovery journey that I wish would have happened a lot earlier in my life, which is maybe what's possible if we as the church are willing to step into this with students. Maybe they can go on the journey long before 28 years old, like I did. I think your own experiences in life can really help just kind of open the box of how to talk about this in your local church context, because I know that was massive for me.
Yeah, I'm curious. Thank you so much
Thanks
for sharing.
so much,
for sure.
Shane.
Yeah.
I'm curious how that journey to self has impacted the way you do youth ministry
Oh, gosh.
and the way you talk to other youth workers
good.
or parents.
Yeah. In every possible way. I mentioned compassion. I think that's probably the biggest thing for me. Like I can see things in students because of what I've experienced myself that maybe not everybody would, or maybe I wasn't as attuned to. I think the other thing is, this is, for me with OCD and GAD, this is not like I had a panic attack in 2018. I told y'all, this has been something since I was a little kid that I've been dealing with.
Yeah.
This is something that I still deal with in significant ways as an adult. Like the past few weeks of my life have been really difficult because I've been dealing with an episode of some of these things. And the only reason I say that is, one, to just be honest, because I know that there are youth ministry leaders out there that are struggling in silence and in secret, and I hate that for them. But two, to go, that type of experience allows me to continue to be compassionate with students that I come across, whether it's in a camp setting or with youth workers who express like, hey, I have no idea what to do in this situation. Like, help me. Their little reminder, like I thought about it this week, actually, as Paul talks about having a thorn in his flesh. And sorry. I think it is that for me, but I think it's in those moments where God's power is made perfect in our weakness. And I think that's what it's unlocked for me, to be able to look into the lives of students and go, when you're at your worst, when you're struggling, you can experience God's power and presence like never before. And if I'm leading from a place of like that vulnerability and self-compassion, but also that place of experiencing the presence of God in my own life, how much more fruit can come in our ministry if we're willing to acknowledge the way that God works in our own life, and then hopefully cast that vision to students, but also walk with them to begin to discover God's presence in that way in their own lives. I think, I know that's a really long answer to your question,
I love it.
but I think that's how it's informed the way that I do ministry.
I want to thank you for the example you just gave to all of us, because I know that you are not the only youth worker who struggles with something like that. And maybe somebody listening has never taken the step of talking about it with someone, or maybe trying to go on the self-discovery journey you went on to discover what you had been struggling with for such a long time and finally have words around. And so I would say, just to anyone listening who doesn't have a support network the way Shane does, I would just encourage you to find someone that you can talk with and begin that journey. And we want you to stay in not just the profession forever, but we need you to. But, you know, present with your family and with your friends and on this earth. And so the more support each of us can have as leaders as we navigate this, the better we can lead students and parents through.
And can I just highlight that you are a walking, talking, breathing example of this idea that You do not have to be fully recovered from something.
Right.
You do not have to be perfect. You don't have to show up with everything completely together all the time to leave an impact.
Oh, gosh.
So what
Thanks
you
for saying
just
that.
did was so powerful. And I agree with you, Ashley, to any leader that's listening, that's struggling with anything that we've talked about, you still can make a difference.
Yes.
And it's not just from what you know, but what you've been through. And don't let anybody tell you that what you've been through prevents you from helping someone because you're not fully recovered, because you
Amen.
can absolutely help a lot of people, just like you
That's
did.
so good.
You just did.
That's so
And
good.
I don't know about you. I would love to hear your thoughts on this, but I'm so frustrated seeing in so many Facebook groups where youth leaders post, I tried to share about my mental health journey with my leadership and they put me on leave, or they let me go,
Yeah.
or they told me I wasn't fit to lead.
Yes.
And I'm like, we have to stop that, first
Yeah.
of all,
Yeah.
as church leaders.
I have so many opinions. From a ministry coach perspective, I love that Shane has been so vulnerable. But in the seat that I sit in, I get so angry because leaders have been vulnerable with their leaders that they need help or assistance. They need to take time away. Or, hey, I just want you to pray for me
Yeah.
because I'm walking through this. And then they use it against them. And I don't know what to say. It makes me so angry because we're asking for everyone to be vulnerable. We're saying it's a safe space. But gosh, y'all, I am so mad about it because I have had close friends who I coach to tell their leaders, because I'm like, other people need to know your story and they need to know what you're struggling with so that they can support you.
Yeah.
And then they were not supported. They were then like, ooh, maybe you shouldn't be working, right? Like, so then it's a loss of job, which adds to the stress, all the things.
Yeah.
So I guess, Shane, I want to ask you,
Yeah.
how did you get your leadership to support you? Which
Yeah.
should be so natural. I hate that I have to ask that question,
Yeah.
but leadership should be supportive. We know
Yeah.
it's not the reality. How did
Yeah.
your leadership respond when you shared about your mental illness?
Yeah. Oh gosh. I am so thankful for incredible leaders in my life. My lead pastor at the time was Joel Thomas. Our next gen pastor was Kenny Conley. Two incredible friends who handled the situation so well. Joel came to the urgent care when I had my panic attack and just showed up, and then was at my house and was supporting myself and also Heather, my wife, through that whole thing while I was just kind of sleeping and recovering. And then on the journey to a diagnosis and medication and all of those things, they were so flexible and so kind. And I think what I'm grateful for is like they continued to believe in me. They didn't
Yes.
allow that to skew any of their opinion on my
Yes.
effectiveness as a youth pastor, kind of your point
Yes.
earlier, Chinwei. Like they continue to be wind in my sails as a leader, and I think first as a father and as a husband,
Nice.
and then as a pastor, and then just provided me with the space. I never felt guilt or shame. I felt, hey, we care about you first, and we still believe in you as a youth ministry leader, and we're going to create space for both of those things to kind of work themselves out however they do. That I don't know if I'd be sitting here in the ministry space had they not responded that way.
Yeah.
So I'm incredibly grateful for their example.
Yeah. And Charlie, what you described to me is like psychological, like toxicity. And it's
Oh.
very psychologically damaging for someone to say, I'm struggling, and they're met with, you're not welcome here.
Yeah.
Which is essentially what I'm hearing. I don't care how you phrase it. Oh, take some time off, which it's in the tone, right? It's the intention behind take some leave or take some time off. So I love what you just described, and I'm just going to say this very quickly. Just because mental health isn't one thing. Mental health, you can have really strong mental health and still be sad and still be anxious and still have really hard days.
Yeah.
And then there are going to be times when your mental health is going to take a hit because something in your life has shifted dramatically. And it's going to be a little bit harder for you. But we all struggle. Can we just name that? That to struggle with your emotions is absolutely part of being human. And when we are struggling, that does not mean that we can't still be effective. It means that we need additional support in order to be effective.
Yeah.
So that example was so powerful, and I think really needs to be, screamed to the folks in the back. So
Yeah.
I'm a little bit angry myself, and I usually, manage that well, but that's psychological warfare, what I just
Oh,
heard. And I
gosh,
know it's
yeah.
happening. I know it's happening,
Yeah.
but it shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing that I just thought of as you were saying that is the reality is that life got a lot more chaotic for Joel and for Kenny at that time, when that happened. Like, there were things that then fell on their plates as lead pastor and next gen pastor that they didn't have to worry about. Like, there were all sorts of, scheduling things and time and like just a lot that got chaotic. And they never allowed me to feel the weight of that. And that,
That's beautiful.
like they weren't afraid to talk to me about it when I, weeks or months later wound up getting my diagnosis. Like, they were open and having conversations, but I never felt the weight. I still to this day don't fully know how much they picked up in that season of my life. I know it was a lot, but they were sensitive and kind and caring enough to go, you know what, like, we're in this together.
Yes.
Like, and that I'm like, gosh, if you're maybe at a larger church and you're the central youth pastor listening, or maybe you forwarded this at this point to your lead pastor, like, can you do that?
Yes.
Like, that's what somebody needs in that time.
Yes.
And I think that's what bearing one another's burdens is meant to be. Like, that's how the body of Christ is supposed to happen. And I'm so grateful that I was able to experience that with them.
So what I'm hearing is we have a desire for our leadership of churches to better support ministry leaders
Yes.
when we come forward with something we're struggling with. I'm guessing the trickle down is true. Are we as youth ministry leaders prepared when our volunteers come to us
Yeah, that's good.
and are struggling? Do they fear being removed from their volunteer role? Do they how do we handle something like that?
Gosh.
Well, we did an RYM episode one time about volunteers and their spiritual maturity.
Yeah.
I think this leans to the leader's spiritual maturity.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
Because as a leader, someone's trusted you with a very private, emotional piece of what they're walking through.
Yeah.
And if we don't respond well, holy cow, y'all. Like, we should be modeling spiritual maturity in those moments.
That's so good.
Yes.
And not to be worried that the small group's not covered, you don't have anybody to fill the space. Like, I think immediately as a leader, that's where your mind goes to, instead of, wow, how can I support this person who shared this with me?
That's so good. I think for me, it goes back to that compassion piece. Like, once I went on my own journey and continue to be on that journey, my compassion is through the roof for small group leaders.
Yeah.
So if I'm completely honest, I probably could have been frustrated, before. Like, I'm an Enneagram 8 as well, Charlie. I know you mentioned that. And sometimes it's just like, we got to do what we got to do. You know what I mean? And you just want to push through. But when you're stopped in your own tracks and you're confronted with your own vulnerabilities, there's something about that I think even God uses, not in a harsh or aggressive, or it's not, I'm not saying that at all about God, but I'm saying how God can make beauty out of things. He uses that. God uses that to allow us to see other people differently.
Yes.
It changes the way that we see them so that we can extend compassion when they're struggling or when they're going through something. I can tell you that since 2018 on, my compassion as a youth ministry leader and even leading volunteers has went through the roof, because I'm like, you know what? I've been there and somebody did it for me.
Yeah.
And that changed everything.
Yeah, that changes.
That's exactly right. 1 in 5 adults have a diagnosable mental health condition.
Wow.
1 in 5 kids between the ages of 13 to 18 has a diagnosable mental health condition. So think about that, 1 in 5. That's plenty common enough, not to mention all of the different life struggles that we all go through. Breakups, a period of, high work volume. Hello,
Yep.
just got out of conference, right? And just other stressors in life, moving and just, separation and divorce. So if we can continue to have these conversations, I think we can normalize that mental health isn't just one thing. It's a state of wellness that enables us to think better, feel better, relate to other people better, and that struggling is normal and that we've all experienced it to some extent or another. So then we can pull from that place of compassion and empathy because I've experienced it, or a family member or a friend has experienced it.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
How do we begin, to incorporate the conversation about mental health in our staff, in our volunteer team, in our ministry, in our parent ministry? Like, what are some ideas we have?
We started talking about it a lot more again, like as I was on my own journey. One of the things that was really cool is that Dr. Chinway and I actually got to do something together. So at the last church that I was at during, the COVID lockdown, we went digital. And Dr. Chinway and I did a digital conversation around mental health.
Yes,
in that it was literally in 2020, I think,
Yes,
in the
it
midst
was.
of all of that. And we just had an open conversation. I was able to share a little bit of my story. And I'll never forget this. This is one of the things I think I'm actually proudest about, not in an arrogant way, I don't think, but I'm like proudest about from, my time as a local church youth pastor. After that conversation, I had a student who reached out to me and was like, "Hey, there were some things I heard in like your story and what you shared that I think maybe I'm experiencing." And we caught up, we had breakfast, we talked through it. He was willing to be vulnerable. And I pointed him in the direction of a mental health professional. He wound up going on his own journey, getting a diagnosis, getting help. And he's actually shared that before in some of our Orange curriculum, but, and went on his own journey toward healing and recovery.
Amazing.
And I don't share that because it's like anything about me. I'm going, just having the conversation might be enough for a student who's sitting there and going, maybe that's what I'm experiencing. Or like, oh, this isn't like just how it's supposed to be. Like I think about myself and go, if somebody would have just had that conversation when I was a high schooler, I think I was intuitive enough to go, wait a second, my experience may not be, quote unquote, normal, although it is normal and increasingly normal. I think that would have unlocked a lot. So just having the conversation openly might be the thing that opens students to seeking out help.
100%. I loved that conversation that we had for that event. The other thing that's coming up for me is that this whole idea of stigma. So we have to be honest in saying that even though the conversations are happening more often, there still is a stigma around mental health and also seeking help for one's mental health. And I think the stigma comes from all of the diverse perspectives around what it means to struggle with your mental health. And I think in the church, and I've heard this quite a bit, even in my therapy practice, that it took a long time for me to get help because I wasn't sure if it meant that I was crazy. I wasn't sure how I was going to be treated. I wasn't sure how my managers and my employers would treat me, or even how my family members would begin to like perceive me, right? And so when we have these conversations, what we're doing, again, what hangs in the balance is we're opening up the path for someone to get the help that they so badly need. And the outcome studies are really, really clear. The earlier mental health issues are detected, the quicker somebody can get help.
Wow.
And that's going to improve outcomes across the board, even when something is genetically linked.
Wow.
Like depression, there may be a genetic component. The earlier you get help, the more favorable your outcomes are.
That's
So
so
we've
good.
got to really highlight that.
Oh, that's so good.
I think for me, you could have, as a parent, put something in the bulletin. Everyone's got a bulletin, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. You could have put something out there that just said support group.
Oh,
Because we support parents who have kids with addiction. We support parents who have kids who are alcoholics. We have support recovery in a lot of church. Where's the support group for the mom and the dad who has a child with a diagnosis and you just don't have a clue and everyone's too embarrassed to talk about it?
wow.
There's no one on Facebook bragging about their kids' stay in a hospital and a treatment center, right?
That's right.
No one's posting that because,
No.
again, the stigma,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
But gosh, I think a biggest piece of ministry that you could do for your families is to acknowledge that your families are lonely
Yes.
and they don't know who to talk to.
Yes.
And I love this word, low-hanging fruit would just be, hey, can we just put a group together?
Yeah.
You don't need to be a trained professional to sit in
No.
a circle with parents who are experiencing the same thing and to get advice,
Yeah.
right?
That's so
I still, because I want to respect my kids' privacy too, right? And so I always ask, can I talk about these things first? But also, I was on the phone talking with my daughter's psychiatrist, and someone I worked with just overheard a bit of it and came to me and started crying like, my kid is hospitalized right now as we speak.
Wow.
And I thought, what do you do? One, why are you at work? Right? Because that's a lot to handle. But two, who are you talking to? Well, I'm not talking to anybody. No one wants to talk about it. And I'm scared. Friends, I think that the church could do a great service to their families. Just let's have a group. Let's just talk about it.
That's good.
You don't have to bake a casserole, or it doesn't have to be hard, right? Like, I think we overcomplicate things. I literally would love just to sit with a group of parents and try to figure out, how do we figure out our kids are not okay?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Can I add like 2 just small things to this?
Yeah.
I think as a youth ministry leader, it doesn't matter the size of your ministry. It doesn't matter how big your church gets. Show up when something happens with a student. And you, like, I think, yes, we want to empower small group leaders, but step into the space. I wasn't always perfect at this, but like I went to the behavioral health facilities.
Yes.
And I remember the first time, it was terrifying for me. I had never been in that context.
Same.
You know, this was before my own journey. So like I had no clue, and I stepped into that space. But stepping into it and realizing this is what a student goes through.
Yep.
This is what they face when they're hospitalized. Like, this is what the environment is like.
Yeah.
Again, it just raises the empathy and compassion
Yes.
piece, and to know like their parents are outside, worried and wondering. So I would say I don't care if you have 1,000 students in your ministry or 2. Be the one who steps into those spaces, and then 2. Make education on this topic your personal responsibility and priority.
Yes.
I can tell you from experience, like, I mean, even, you know, I shared the last few weeks have been tough for me. My dad, for the first time, I think, started reading some articles on what OCD is, and what that has meant to me is, I don't even know that I can put it into words, because what he realizes now is like, and Dr. Chenoway, you know this better than me, but OCD is like one of the most debilitating mental illnesses that there is.
100%.
And he's understanding things about me in a way that he never has. So that's my dad. But imagine if us as youth ministry leaders dove into this with our students.
Yes.
So that when, you know, we hear if they have a diagnosis, or even if we just see them experiencing, you know, general anxiety, we have a better understanding of how to talk to them, of how to be compassionate and empathetic with them, and just a better understanding of what it's like to be in their shoes.
Yeah.
And I think that can make a world of difference to the next generation.
Yeah, the 2 things that combat stigma the most are normalizing it, and education.
Yeah.
So I
Oh,
love
that's
the
good.
idea of the bulletin. I also love the idea of, I think most churches, regardless of the size, have a website,
Yeah.
have a tab that says mental health, and have resources available. If you're able to host a parent night, even
Yeah.
with like a local therapist who I used to do it for a slice of pizza. So you don't have to have a huge budget, right? And even be very specific. This is someone at our church, if this is possible, that can walk you through the process of finding where supports are. I always say start with your pediatrician,
Oh,
because
yeah,
that
that's
feels
good.
less
Yeah.
intrusive.
Yeah.
And also, even what you're saying, because that is really scary for families. If your child is facing a severe mental health challenge, I will go to the mental health therapist that first session with you, or I will walk you through what it's like to, you know, explore options for psychiatric admission.
Yeah.
Very scary, but how
Yeah.
powerful would it be if we had that on a website?
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
Not probably many people would take you up on that,
Yeah.
but they see that that's something that's available and it's coming from the church.
That's so good.
I'm reading a book right now that's talking about with AI technology, that AI counseling is becoming a thing. And
interesting.
I don't know if you guys have talked about this at all,
Not a fan.
but
You can take that out if you need to.
it's fine. I'm just saying it's going to be
A thing.
accessible to people.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then
It's
I was-
inevitable. Yeah.
And then I was talking to my sister, who's a mental health professional for a huge organization that supports a lot of big businesses in the country. And she was saying the way that they're talking about leveraging AI, it made me think about how churches could leverage it, is like almost like a support line for people who need support, but it's AI who sends back the
Resources.
the resource
Yes,
on
I like that.
anxiety,
I like
the
that.
resource on local
love
counselors
that.
you can reach out to, and helplines and things like that. And so I was like, oh, that's an interesting way to leverage that technology in a way that points them to relationships or like
good.
resources. And I thought, the church needs to get on that. So
Yeah, that's
anyways,
good.
we could probably talk about this for
We could.
hours.
Can I say that there is I don't know, like a continuing education program that's coming up for therapists on how to get on board with AI, because right now we hate it because we don't understand it, and we
Wow.
don't understand. We think about how it could be harmful, but I love what you just shared, because a lot of this is like with everything else. Learn how we can leverage it, because it's not going anywhere,
Yeah,
right? So
that's good.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
That's good.
it's cool. Well, thank you all so much for your honesty and vulnerability in this. We'll have to continue this
Yes. For
conversation
sure.
another
Yeah,
time.
definitely.
Thank you for tuning in. If there's something that you've been rethinking when it comes to youth ministry, especially in the mental health space, we would love to hear about it. Please reach out, DM us, and let's talk.